Currently feels like negative 23 out here where I'm at. But enough of the negativity about the negative weather. Let's get right into episode three worlds, part three. And today I'm going to talk about my viewpoint on the third major status that goes on in the world, the rich. We've already discussed the middle class. We've discussed the poor. And now I'm going to discuss my viewpoint and perception on the rich. The first thing I would like to say, getting into this with no definitions or anything to dig into, is keep in mind that we do not get to pick and choose our parents. I may have said this before on another episode, but I'm not sure. We don't get to pick and choose our parents. We don't get to pick and choose what type of situation we're going to be born into. The reason I'm going to say that is there's two types of rich and wealthy people. You have some that people will refer to, quote unquote, as a trust fund baby and try to say things about them not earning their money. And then you have the person who has become rich because or wealthy because they have done some type of business deal that has eventually turned a profit to the point where the gross profit margin has reaped in revenue and benefits that have been outstanding for them over the period of time. And then you have people who may have done some type of investments or something like that and become wealthy that way. The thing about this, to me, in my opinion, is it doesn't really matter how a person becomes rich or wealthy. I think it matters more what you decide to do with it. And the reason I say that is because, like I said, we don't get to pick and choose how we come into the world. You know, we do get to pick and choose certain situations and how we decide to handle them as far as doing business deals or operating a business or something like that. But if you were born into wealth, you're just born into wealth. If you start up a business and it, turns a major profit and the gross profit margin skyrockets through the roof, I mean, it's a blessing. You know what I mean? No matter how you look at it. If you pick the right investments and they turn a profit and you become a multi-millionaire off of it, it's just a blessing. There's no reason to really try to say whether a person deserves to have the wealth that they have or not. And especially if you want to talk about someone being born into it, because, like I said, when you're a baby, you don't know anything about it. All you know is when you learn that the wealth is there, it's there. And you do what you decide to do with it. So I never really care when people would try to say things about someone, maybe being a trust fund baby or, they come from money and their parents have this, have that. Doesn't really make a difference. Now, another thing that I want to address, since I've addressed that, and I guess I didn't really summarize that point up properly. What I meant to summarize that point up with would be it more so the biggest thing would be what you decide to do with the money, not really where the money came from or how you got the money, but what you decide to do with it would be the most important thing if you were wealthy, no matter what, whether it's a trust fund, investments, or business. Now, the next point that I would like to talk about is the fact that one thing that is apparent in the world that we live in, and this is more so a fact, if you look at human happiness, it's easy for a person, and I've even felt like this. I've been poor, I've been middle class, lower middle class. I know what it feels like to be like, man, if I just had 150,000, or if I just had 1.5 million, if I just had $8 million, you know what I mean? If I could just win the Powerball, I know what that feeling feels like to think those things. But this next point I'm going to make is this. If you look, and this is a fact that I'm going to make, when you look across the world at happiness or a person feeling that their life is complete, it doesn't really have anything to do with money. Because if you look at things like suicide, it's all across the board. I mean, you have a homeless person who would be at the bottom of being poor, And some people have been homeless 30, 40 years. And you would think, man, if that was my life, I'd just end it. I'm just saying some people think like that. Whereas you have other people who may have $50 million in their life. And then someone on the lower end of life that doesn't have financial means like that would look at someone like that and go, what in the world? You got it all. You got everything. You got $50 million. Why don't you just get on a jet and go to Peru or go to Hawaii for a month? Or, you know what I mean? So when you think about life in general and human happiness, whether you want to say poor, middle class, or rich, the one fact that is apparent is that it doesn't have much to do with your financial status. Human happiness as a whole individually has to deal with how we decide to look at life, view life, and feel about our own life from the inside out. Now, obviously, different circumstances can play a part in that. We could spin off and talk about mental health issues and things like that could play into into the role of human happiness. But for the most part, if you're talking about taking out mental health issues or anything like that, human happiness usually comes from the core inside of a person and how they feel and view themselves, not what they may or may not have for financial means. The other thing I want to talk about when you talk about the rich, that's another equal playing field for rich, middle class, and poor, is human health. Now, whether you're poor, middle class, or rich, 9 times out of 10, you can afford to eat, drink some water, and have the sustenance that you need daily. It may not be everything you need. It may not be the best of things that you need. It may not be a selection of choices that you can make every day. But most of us still are able to pick and choose, what we want to have on a daily basis for nutrition, no matter what playing field we're in, for the most part. But when you think about health, you could be, look at what was it, Steve Jobs, no matter how much money you have or how much you're worth, if you get sick, you get sick. Human health does not care about what your net worth is or what you have. And you can look over, 100 years and see plenty of athletes, famous actors, actresses that have died over the years from failed health. And it doesn't matter if you're poor, rich, or middle class. If your health decides to fail and you are sick beyond any cure or treatment that's available, doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. There's nothing you can do about it. So when you think about those kind of things, money doesn't matter much when it comes to that. Now, let's not be fooled and say that money doesn't matter at all, because it certainly does. Money, as they say, quote unquote, makes the world go round. There are not a lot of things that you can get done in this world without using some type of revenue, whether it's a trade-off system or actual revenue itself. Most things turn back to financial gains, turning hands in one way or another for business to operate around the world. There are not a lot of things that are free in life. So that means you do need to have money in order to survive in the world that we live in. I would say, in my personal opinion, that's another fact, in my personal opinion, that you do need to have money. But as far as how much money, that's up to each individual person. There are some people who would not want to be rich. There are some people who are just happy exactly the way their life is and just having the basic things that they need. Whereas there are some people who couldn't imagine not being rich. Now, one thing that I can say from a poor person standpoint, you learn to adapt to ride the wave through life from the ups and downs of financial hiccups when you come up poor. So, if you were to grow up poor or lower middle class and you become wealthy and rich, through whatever means, and then for some reason, some bad deal happens, or maybe, mistakes of your own, who knows, you end up losing it all. It's a lot easier to adapt to living without if you have lived without before, in my opinion. So I think it would be harder for a person who has always had to live below their means in most circumstances than a person who has not lived below their means before, and does not really know what it feels like to have less. Because, you do have to have a lot of self-assurance, and you do have to be able to see that there is an end to the tunnel, even if you can't see the light there when, things are looking gloomy sometimes. Otherwise, we'd all give up. So, money does play a big part in how life can be for us in this world, whether it can be good or bad or great or not so great. It does lead back to money in some ways. Money obviously does not, you can't buy moral standards. Whatever moral standards you decide to live your life by, those are the ones that you're going to live your life by. Some people say money can make people worse. That may be true, may not be true. Being someone who has never been rich, I can't say. I can't say what I would do if I had $100 million. I don't know what that's like. I think we all would like to think that we wouldn't become worse in one way or another, but who knows? And, who's to say that it really makes you worse? Sometimes I thought about this. It could make people worse, like they say, I don't know. But it could also just be the fact that because you have the means there, it seems like it's worse. Maybe it's just the fact that you're able to do things that you weren't able to do before you had the money. So I think sometimes through life, there's a lot of opportunities, but when you're talking about money and things that have to deal with financial aspects, if the money's not there, the opportunity's not there. But then if the money is there, the opportunity is there. So sometimes it's not always, in my opinion, that money is making people worse. Sometimes it's just the fact that now that the money's there, they're able to actually do some of the things that they may not have been able to do before. Another thing that I want to talk about when you talk about rich people and wealthy people, I personally know and have met rich people and wealthy people. I've dated a few women that were rich, that were worth over $1 million before too, that had, homes paid for, nice vehicles paid for, and they were nice. They were good people. They weren't snooty or, acting funny or weird because of the money. I've met a lot of nice people who are worth millions of dollars. I used to cut Stacey King's hair for the Chicago Bulls. And let me tell you, he's one of the nicest guys to have a regular conversation with. He tipped very well when I cut his hair. And he was a very nice gentleman. He never acted funny or, he never treated me any kind of way. I ran into him a few times outside of a few restaurants before when he'd be having a drink, and he even bought me a drink there, before, and chatted up with me at the restaurant. So, just because a person has money or they're wealthy doesn't mean just because their living means is above yours that they're going to treat you like their life is above yours. Now, we all know that it doesn't always operate that way. And, some people do feel that they may be worth more than others in life because of their financial means. But there are poor people who feel the same way. There are middle class people who feel the same way, that their life is worth more than someone else's. Usually, the only thing that makes it a lot more of a billboard effect, if you'll have it, is the fact that, if I write on a little piece of paper that my life is better than quote unquote Mark's life, and it's just on a little piece of paper, how many people are going to see it? And, other than Mark, if I pass it to him, not very many people. But if I put my life is better than Mark's life on a billboard, and I pay for a billboard out on I-90 where, thousands of people are driving by it every day, and I put a picture of Mark up there, more people are going to see it. The thing is because I have the financial means to express on a bigger platform how I felt about someone's life being worth less than mine or whatever, it seems worse. But really, if I write it on a piece of paper and hand it to somebody, it's the same thing. The fact that I think my life is worth more or better than theirs, it's the same exact thing. So sometimes just because a person has money and the means to do something, it may look worse to us when they have more because they can do it in a different manner. But really, the outcome, in my opinion, is the same, whether it's a little piece of paper or a big billboard. I also think that when you look at the three classes, poor, middle class, and rich, and make no mistake, there are still classes within those classes. This is just my opinion of breaking down those three sections of life. When you look at that, you see, I talked about like the suicide and stuff before at the beginning here, and you can find that in every class, but you find everything else there too. You find dysfunctional families. You find functional families. You find perfect homes. You find broken homes. You find child abuse. You find loving parents. You find spousal abuse. You find loving spouses. So it doesn't have to do, again, with how much money you have, how a person decides to live their life according to standards, morals, and the goals that they have in life. Sometimes when you think, in those classes, sometimes it can be hard to not have a bias depending on which class you're in to another. And the reason I say that is I'm not saying just a rich person being biased towards a middle class person or a poor person. It could go the opposite way. I've known plenty of poor people growing up with poor people, and I've had, poor people say things to me too, like, oh, why would somebody buy that? Why would you do that? That's just a waste of money. Well, it probably seems like a waste of money when you don't have the money, but when you're talking to someone that's worth $50 million, $100 million, $500 million, $1 billion, I mean, how can you and I understand what a waste of money would be when you're worth something like that? How can you say that's one too many Chanel bags or Fendi bags, or that's one too many chains, or one too many suits, one too many pairs of shoes, one too many dresses, one too many pairs of jeans, one too many boats, one too many houses. I mean, obviously, if you lose it, then it probably was one too many. But, honestly, if it's not your money, it's not not your place to decide how someone decides to spend it. And, you can't really, it's not for you to decide if someone's playing fast and loose with their money. That's their decision, So bias can go in both aspects. I mean, it could be a poor person looking at a rich person. It could be a rich person looking down on a poor person, or, middle class looking down on either one, looking down on rich people thinking they abuse money, or looking at poor people like, oh, why does, this person just try to do better, or, this person's a degenerate. I mean, you see it in any one of those classes. You see people looking at people that way. And in my opinion, once again, make that clear, I think it comes back to the fact that it's always easier to relate to the things that you know and the things that you're used to. So, if you're poor it's hard to relate to a rich person. If you're rich, it's hard to relate to a poor person. And I'm not talking about just being human beings, but I'm talking about the way that their life is lived on a day-to-day basis. And if you're middle class, it's hard to relate to a rich person or a poor person. But whatever class and category you fall into, it's usually a lot easier to relate to. I'll give you an illustration. If you're a middle class person, and right now, like I talked about at the very beginning of my podcast, the weather is really cold today. It says, according to my weather app, that it feels like negative 23 or 24. So if you're middle class and you run into somebody else that's middle class and, oh, it's cold outside. Yeah, I know, man. It is cold. I have to crank that heat up and that bill's going to be high next month. And then another middle class person you're talking to, usually they'll, co-sign right with you with that conversation. Oh, no, man. I hate it when that bill jumps up like that. That's because it's easy for you all to relate because your circumstances are the same. Now, if you say that same thing to someone who is wealthy, they may, and this is my opinion, they may reply to you with, yeah, well, you got to do what you got to do. Got to stay warm, because it's no big deal for them to stroke, and a little extra money to make sure that their family is taken care of and provided for and comfortable. But if you say that to someone who's poor, they may look at you and go, well, at least you have heat. I mean, both sides of the spectrum. It is easy for human beings to relate to people that are just like us. And when I say that, I'm talking about circumstances. I'm not talking about race, age groups. I'm talking about circumstances, classes that we live in, classes within classes. So that was my perception on rich. I gave you the perception on poor for episode 2. And episode 1, I started out talking about middle class. So, as always, I would love to hear your feedback, thoughts on the conversation. I appreciate getting feedback from people, even if you don't agree with my perception of things or the way that I look at things, because you may bring something to my thought process that I did not think about. So that's the wonderful thing about communicating with other human beings. But if you are in the Midwest, stay safe, stay warm. If you're in a warm state, send some of that heat our way. We'd love to have some of it. And don't forget to follow my Twitter at Ethan the Truth. Follow my Instagram at Ethan the Truth. And follow my YouTube at Ethan the Truth. And if you want a funny laugh, you can go on my TikTok and follow that at Ethan the Truth. So enjoy your Saturday. Look yourself in the mirror. Look yourself eye to eye, face to face. Ask yourself the question every day. Am I being great?